You've done the hard work to get to the starting line of retirement, but what if one spouse wants guaranteed income and the other one wants aggressive growth? What if you've run the numbers for long-term care, but the what ifs are still keeping you up at night? Or what if you want to retire before you turn 65? What are you going to do for health insurance before Medicare kicks in? Today, we're going to address all three of these questions in this Q&A edition from the YouTube comments. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the 98th edition of the Planning for Retirement podcast. My name is Kevin Lau. I am your host. And as you are well aware, we're underway on our YouTube giveaway. We've already announced the winner and the runner-up a couple of weeks ago. We've given away the freebie for the runner-up, and we are in the process of doing the free retirement review for our winner. So super exciting stuff. But as I mentioned last week, I wanted to dedicate some content to answer some of your awesome questions that you put in that YouTube thread. So episode 98, we addressed 3 of those goodies. And today we're going to have 3 more questions that we're going to tackle from that YouTube thread. But quickly, just wanted to update you all for all of you who care. And I know most of you care. Trust me, I know this. But our club won the Haskew Cup. We brought the Haskew Cup back home. I think the other team, they had won the 3 in a row. Okay. So we had a 3-year losing streak until this year. So, obviously I made a difference. Just kidding. But seriously, I need to get some feedback from you hardcore golfers out there. Okay. So Saturday we had our 4-ball and then 4 sums. Great time. Some of the most competitive golf I've played in many, many years. And it was a blast. Mixed bag, won one match, lost the other match. But on Sunday, it was the singles match. Of course, naturally, this is a Ryder Cup style event. So Sunday singles. Well, we were both spraying it. My opponent and I were both spraying it all over the course on the front 9. The nerves were there. And, I started to find the swing in the back 9, but I was so many holes down at this point in time, but I went dormy going into 15. So what that means is there were 4 holes remaining and I was 4 holes down. Okay. So I had to win every single hole from 15, 16, 17, 18 in order to tie my match. And that would have awarded myself and my opponent a half a point. Otherwise, if I tie one of those holes, or of course, if I lose a hole, the match is over. I lose. My opponent has a point. Well, dormy 15, I birdie number 15. Had a great drive, hit a nice little wedge in there, made a birdie. Feeling pretty good. Now I'm 3 down, 3 to play. I'm first on the tee. On number 16, I absolutely smashed my driver 115 yards out. I hit a wedge in there and my opponent is struggling to make a 6. So it's pretty much, that hole is pretty much over. And by the way, the cup was already decided. We had already won. Our team pretty much dominated this year. I think it was 40-24. So the cup was over. We're basically playing for bragging rights at this time, for pride. And of course, I was playing with one of my teammates who was playing another individual on the other team. So I had a teammate who was riding in my car. We're hanging out, having a good time, but he's playing a different match against our opponents. Well, we're sitting there in the 16th green, which, like I said, I'm putting for birdie. My opponent's struggling to make a 6. And I asked my teammate, I said, hey, looks like this putt goes a little bit uphill, breaking to the right. And my partner, who again is on my team, not in this particular match, but he was on my team. He said, no, kind of gave me a little bit of a read. He was pointing to some spots and, truthfully, I didn't even listen to him. I didn't even hit a great putt. I ended up 3-putting for a 5, but still winning the hole. So we're on the 17th tee and my opponent comes to me. I saw him talking to our captain, our head pro. And then he comes over to the tee box before I hit my shot and he said, hey, just want to let you know, you can't get advice from your teammate in singles. So he said, we're still going to play out 17 and 18, but I just wanted to let you know that's going to be a penalty. And I was thinking in my head, I'm like, what do you mean we're going to play out, but that's a penalty? Because in my head, I'm like, I won the hole. So does that mean we have the hole? Does that mean I automatically lose number 16? But ultimately, that's what happened. I had to forfeit number 16. We still played out 17, 18, which, by the way, I beat him on 17 with an amazing up and down for par. And then on 18, I hit the green in 2 and a par 5, also beat him on 18. So in my mind, mental victory, but technicality, he had every right to call me on that penalty. Truth, this is my first Hasku Cup, first time playing in this kind of Ryder Cup style format, like a serious one, not just with my buddies. He had every right to call me on that rule because, again, in singles, again, I didn't know the rule. In singles, you cannot ask for advice on the putting green. If you're hitting a shot from the tee and you give your partner or even your opponents the yardage using a rangefinder, according to the rules, that is not advice, but reading a putt is advice. And my teammate didn't even know the rule either. He confirmed the read that I was looking at and told me his thoughts on the particular putt. So again, my teammate or my opponent had every right to call me on that penalty. My question for you, PFR Nation, should he have called me on that? Or should he have said, hey, you know what, Kevin, I know this is your first Hasku Cup. He knew this, by the way. He also knew the match was over. He claimed he didn't know the match was over, but I know he knew the match was over. And he should have said, in my opinion, he could have said, I should say, I'm not going to give you my opinion. You probably know my opinion, but he could have said, hey, Kevin, you can't do that. According to a certain rule, you can't give advice on putts. No harm, no foul. We're playing for fun. This is just for pride. Let's finish the last 2 holes. You're 2 down. Let's go. But he didn't. He called me on the penalty and the match was over going into 17. So that was how my Hasku Cup ended. It didn't matter in the end. We brought the cup home. We had a great time. It was all for fun. It was a great event overall. I was definitely a little bit caught off guard on how serious these guys are taking it, but I'm excited for next year because I want to go back and I want to get a rematch on that guy at their club. But I would love to know from you, PFR Nation. Drop it in the comment section. What would you have done? Was he right? Would you have called me on that penalty or would you have given me a warning and just said, hey, let's play on? Would love to hear your opinion on that. I'm not going to take offense either way. Okay. You probably know how I feel about it because I'm sharing it on the podcast. But I just needed to vent a little bit. I've already vented to my wife, but she doesn't really care for golf. She kind of cares for golf because of me, but she's forced to, but she doesn't really get it. I've talked to some of my buddies about it and they've shared me their opinion. I would love to hear from you, PFR Nation. What would you have done in that situation? Enough about golf. Let's hit these questions. All right. The first one, I kind of merged these two together. All right. So essentially the question, the kind of that question number one was, how do you implement retirement income when one spouse favors total return or more growth and the other favors the guarantees, that guaranteed income protection? Another question that said, spouses risk averse and scared to spend, want to help me convince them. So I kind of almost felt like it was the same type of question because this type of thing comes up all the time where one spouse feels a certain way and the other spouse feels the opposite. And that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, this probably sounds familiar to you, not even just on the retirement planning or financial planning side, but opposites attract. And so this is kind of that spender versus saver mentality or the risk taker versus, the security seeker mentality. And again, this plays out in most marriages. If you're kind of the same thought process as your spouse, that's more of the exception than the rule. So the question is like, how do you actually build a retirement income plan that both spouses can sleep well at night with when one spouse prefers one way and the other spouse prefers the other? So, I guess what I would first say is you're not just solving for mathematical optimization. Okay. You are solving for peace of mind and shared confidence. And the mistake I oftentimes see individuals make, typically the CFO of the household, the ones that kind of think they know it all, right? And most of you are probably the CFOs of the household if you're listening to this podcast. I'm the CFO of my household. And I'm telling you, I think I know it all. Okay. But trying to convince your spouse, and I know this just from my experience, not only working with clients, but also talking to my wife about money, is that trying to convince them to think the way we think is not going to work. Okay. Trying to show a bunch of charts and graphs and why, total return is going to outperform a guaranteed annuity. It just doesn't work because fear is not logical. It's emotional. But what does work from my personal experience working with clients and helping people navigate this dynamic for the last 17 years is that building a plan that gives permission to spend without guilt or fear because those essentials are locked in. And sometimes it's better that if it comes from a third party, not your spouse. Okay. And I'm going to say this just, I am biased on this one. Obviously, this is what I do for a living. And so I share this not just because I'm an advisor. I mean, I'm not saying, hire me because I can help you with this dynamic. What I'm saying is a third party, objective third party. It doesn't even have to be a traditional financial advisor. It could be a friend or a trusted CPA or whoever it might be, or even coworker, right? Or family member. But if you've been married long enough, there's an occasional tendency to not want to listen to your spouse, right, Jessica? And so what we do in practice is we don't have to go all in on one philosophy, okay? Meaning you don't have to just say, well, my way or the highway, let's go growth and income and call it a day. We're not going to do any fixed annuities. We're not going to do any guaranteed income sources. You can layer income and growth. You can use the guaranteed income sources you already have at your disposal, things like Social Security, or maybe you're eligible for a pension, right? And maybe you start there and you start to build an income floor and then have that conversation with your spouse to say, hey, how much money would you need to basically sleep well at night on a guaranteed basis? And let's say that number is $100,000 a year. And maybe you have 70 coming in from pension plus Social Security, or maybe from your 2 Social Security payments. And there's a gap of maybe about $30,000. Well, maybe what you say is, okay, you know what? I love you. I respect you. I want you to be confident about a retirement plan. And even if I don't believe in annuities, let's solve for covering the gap of $30,000 with guaranteed income. And maybe you need to buy an annuity for, $450,000 or $500,000 to provide that level of guaranteed income for the rest of your life and your spouse's life. That security, that peace of mind is going to go such a long way for that mental health in retirement for your spouse. And the CFO spouse, everything that's left over, maybe you annuitize $500,000. Maybe you've got another $2 million left over, and then you can get a little bit more aggressive with your portfolio. Because what I would also say is the math actually is in favor of that strategy. Okay. Assuming longevity, assuming, a reasonable longevity amount, if you compare guaranteed income annuities as part of the income cash flows versus just traditional portfolio withdrawals, systematic withdrawals, and you compare the payout rate and then ultimately the ending value of the portfolio, whatever's left over, assuming the same spending out of both plans, the one with the annuity and systematic withdrawals, I typically see it beating out just systematic withdrawals on their own. And we've talked about this before, because you are not going to out withdraw an annuity. Okay. If you're a DIYer and you're coming up with your own rate of withdrawal, we've talked about the 4% rule, and a lot of people start there. A lot of people start with maybe 4.5%. I've also seen people start with 3 or 3.5%. And then you compare that to what you could receive in a guaranteed income annuity, a payout rate of maybe 7.5, or even 8%, depending on when you purchase that annuity. You're going to double or even more than double what kind of income you can receive out of that bucket of assets. And therefore, that allows you to be more aggressive with your liquid investments. So even the math actually is in favor of the life annuity option. Now, obviously, the downside being, what if you died early? What if you pass away early? That annuity was annuitized. That's no longer an asset on your balance sheet. Now that's part of the insurance company's balance sheet, which you may not want to give the insurance company $500,000. Therefore, you can create some kind of guaranteed period. You can make sure, of course, your spouse is taken care of for their life. But if both of you pass away unexpectedly, you can name a successor beneficiary. You can have a guaranteed period in there for 10, 15, or even 20 years. If that gives you that peace of mind, thinking you're going to, leave those assets to the insurance company versus your beneficiaries, those options are there. But I guess my point in this is, don't just focus on convincing your spouse that your way is right, because you're probably wrong. Okay. Because, trust me, I think annuities they just get a bad rap in the industry because of the way they're positioned and sold. And I've seen this firsthand when I was working at insurance companies that sold annuities. I saw this all the time. And that was a big reason I wanted to get out of that way of doing business and work in the fee only capacity. But being fee only, even though I don't sell annuities and insurance products, I definitely recommend them where they fit. And I definitely see them giving that peace of mind for the people that they fit for. And so don't just try to convince your partner, your spouse, that your way is right, because it's probably not. And you don't have to go in one way or the other. Okay. We literally just went through this with a client that's about to retire in January. One spouse wants that fixed income, that guaranteed floor. The other spouse is more aggressive. We're going to do a combination. We're going to take some of the income out of the more aggressive portfolio as a systematic withdrawal, and then we're going to take the other asset and turn that into a life annuity income stream. So every plan's different. we want to first solve for the right income cash flow goal. Okay. I think that's the most important thing. If you kind of separate your needs, your wants and wishes, maybe take care of those needs with guaranteed income, and have that conversation. Hey, if 100,000 is the number, let's figure out a way to get 100,000 in guaranteed income between Social Security, pension, and annuities. And then the rest we can invest. And truthfully, you can even be more aggressive with the assets that are left in the balance sheet. Okay. So I think the goal is oftentimes the same thing, but in terms of how to get there, it's a little bit more nuanced based on that peace of mind factor. And that ultimately is going to drive what kind of solution you put in place. Okay. So I would just say, don't try to change each other. Don't try to, convince your spouse to think a different way, because this is not going to work. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And if that's how they feel, you need to honor that. You need to respect that. Otherwise, this is going to lead to some stress in retirement, especially when things get a little rocky. The spouse that wanted that guaranteed income, let's say we go through a bear market like 2022. They're like, hey, our conservative portfolio is down 20%. What's going on? Okay. You're the CFO of the household. What are you doing here? We had 2 million. Now we have 1.6. How are we feeling about our withdrawal plan now? Whereas that guaranteed income source, if that was put in place, give a little more peace of mind to that spouse that wanted that conservative income plan. So not just good for the financial plan, but good for the marriage as well. All right. Number 2, I'm going to read the question verbatim. I've set aside in a spreadsheet my calculated number to self-fund my long-term care, but the variables and assumptions concerns me. Okay. Now, I don't know specifically what the variables were. I don't know specifically what the assumptions are. Okay. But here's what I would say is that it's not just about the numbers. When it comes to long-term care planning, the numbers, I'm not going to say they're irrelevant, but they're not as important as the human impact. Okay. On your spouse, on you, on your loved ones. But before we get to the human impact, let's unpack the numbers real quick. Okay. Let's first talk about the assumptions that were probably put into the plan. It's probably some kind of average cost of care. Okay. And the most common one is the Genworth cost of care study. They do this on an annual basis. It's great. I think actually now it's carescout.com is the new website, but it breaks down the average cost of care for things like home health care or adult daycare, assisted living, or nursing home. I'm going to share my screen with you. This is the 2024 cost of care from Genworth. And like I said, we're going to link this in the show notes. But it breaks down the monthly costs of home health care, adult daycare, assisted living, and nursing home. So in a low end adult day health care, and now this is, I can't imagine this is the same number of hours as like a nursing home care, because it's just not going to provide that same level of care for that duration. It's more of like daycare. You just need a few hours of a break. Maybe you're the caregiver. You need a few hours of a rest here. So that's $2,167 a month. An assisted living community, it's about $5,900 a month. And this is the national average. And this is the tricky part is the cost of care varies dramatically depending on where you live, right? And then you go all the way up to a nursing home. Private room is $10,600 per year. So, if you're using these numbers, now the question is, well, here are the averages. Tell me how many hours a week you're going to need care. When is the care going to begin? And how long are you going to need the care? And I will just sit here and wait, right? I think this is the problem, is that no one has a crystal ball. No one knows, A, if you're going to need care, and then B, to what extent you're going to need the care. But even if you use the figures that we just shared, let's say for men and women, we know that there is a little bit of a difference. There's a slight nuance in terms of the average duration of care. And so according to that same study, men typically need care for 2.2 years on average, women for about 3.7 years. But there's also a good chance you might need care for 5 years or more. And that's why these averages are very tough. Okay. Because it's assuming, some people need care for a couple of months, and then some people may need, memory care for 10 years. But let's take that hypothetical private room nursing home, $127,750 on an annual basis. If you multiply that by 3.7 years to figure out how much women would need to self-fund that, that's $472,000 today and some change. For men, if you multiply that number by 2.2, it's $281,000 in today's dollars. And that's the key, is that that's in today's dollars. Now we're going to assume, okay, now what does inflation look like? So I don't know what kind of inflation number you're looking at, but the inflation rate for nursing homes has been about 2.32% over the last 20 years. Many insurance companies project forward using 5%. Actually, in this Genworth cost of care study, I found it interesting. They have a baseline assumption for inflation at 3% a year. So a little bit higher than, the CPI goal for the Fed. The Fed wants to keep it at 2%. They're saying that looking forward, cost of long-term care, custodial care will be inflating at 3% a year. So that's the number. If you want to use that in today's dollars, $472,000 for women, men, $281,000, right? But you're obviously still having issues with, this is still keeping you up at night. This is still bugging you because the mathematical variances are going to be so great. Because what if you only need care for a year? What if you need care for 7 years? That changes the numbers dramatically. It goes from maybe $127,000 upwards to, $800,000 plus in total funds that you need to self-fund care. And that's just today's dollars. Now we need to inflate this forward. So what kind of rate of return are you going to have in your assets? And how does that impact how much you're going to have when you need care? But then that again involves you knowing exactly when that care event is going to start. So obviously I say all this kind of jokingly because, it's impossible to predict how much exactly you're going to need to fund care. But hopefully those numbers at least give you a starting point in today's dollars of what it might cost to fund a private nursing home. But I wanted to share this story. I had this really nice guy that I worked with back in my TIAA days. He was a widower in his 80s and lived alone. He had 4 daughters. 3 were, not going to say estranged, but he was definitely closest to the one of the daughters who also lived about 10 minutes down the road. And she would occasionally come in and check in on dad. She was even involved in some of the meetings, while I worked with him. And she was listed, of course, as the power of attorney for both financial and healthcare decisions, given her close proximity. Well, when he was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, it was a little bit of a shock, and he was having a tough time. It was very difficult to get him to agree to move anywhere, let alone some kind of nursing home or memory care facility. So, he had a decent nest egg, nothing crazy outrageous, but with Social Security, pension, and his assets, he had plenty to live comfortably. But the daughter, she was very afraid to spend anything. The sticker price I remember looking when she was looking at some home help, bringing some help into the home, it would have amounted to about anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 a year, depending on what she was delegating and how often, things like bathing or dressing or toileting or eating over time, or just getting around, moving around. And it's not that his daughter thought dad can't afford it, but truthfully, I think part of it was that she knew it would impact her inheritance. Okay. And I didn't know all of her financial situation, but I gathered she didn't really have a lot herself. She was close to retirement herself and pretty sure she needed the money more than her 3 siblings. And that was part of why, the client I worked with named her as the majority beneficiary. Okay. She was a substantial majority beneficiary. I think she was set to inherit close to 65% of the assets, and the other 35% would go to the other 3 siblings. And so she elected to do some of the care herself. And then she also hired some really unexpected, or really inexpensive, I should say, home health care. Okay. Just to help out and manage some of the care. And she was hoping, I think it wouldn't last very long. And this sounds kind of messed up, but ultimately, she finally, at the very end, when things got really bad, she checked him into the memory care. He agreed to it. He kind of fought tooth and nail, but he agreed to it in his final 6 months of life. But I think the lesson here is that even if mathematically you have the assets to self-fund, would your loved ones hire the help you need? Because another very common scenario is not even just, hey, adult children wanting to protect their inheritance. That is common. But another very common scenario is maybe your spouse, maybe they have another 10, 15, or even 20 years of longevity expected. And oftentimes it's the female spouse that will kick in and be the caregiver first, because the males typically will pass away first. And so on the female spouse, they end up just doing the caregiving because that's just what women do. They're caregivers by nature, but they also may feel that they cannot spend the money because they need it for their own financial security, their own retirement, their own longevity protection. So the result, they just start doing the caregiving themselves out of fear of the unknown because there was not a dedicated pool of assets to fund long-term care. And I'm not just saying this has to be done with long-term care insurance. I think it's great if it is done with long-term care insurance, because I promise you, if husband needed care and the wife had the option to either do the care herself or file an insurance claim and pay for the care, promise you she's going to be doing the latter. She's going to file the claim get that insurance check as soon as possible, and then begin reimbursing for that help that she hired for. But it doesn't have to be long-term care insurance. It could be some kind of brokerage account, right? Maybe you separate a taxable brokerage account as, a side fund. Maybe you take 150 grand out, put it into a side fund, let that grow aggressive over the long haul. And then you communicate that to your spouse and say, hey, this is our long-term care fund. Please spend it if I ever need care, because I don't want you to be in that situation where you're mentally and physically exhausted because you're taking care of me. Okay. Maybe it's an HSA. Maybe it's a health savings account. That's a very tax advantage way to do it. Maybe it's a specific Roth IRA that's carved out into the side. Okay. Or a traditional IRA. But I think the important part is, if you're not going to buy insurance, and I would assume based on this question, you're not buying insurance, the numbers are stressing you out. You don't know if your assumptions are right. What I'm going to try to reassure you is that you're not going to get the numbers right. It's impossible. There are too many variables. But if you're going to self-insure, if you're going to self-fund, have a dedicated pool of assets and verbalize that to your spouse. Okay. Or whoever the caregiver might be. Maybe it's an adult child, or maybe heaven forbid a sibling, but it could be a sibling, right? Verbalize that and then give them that permission to spend the money. Because oftentimes I see that as, the non-CFO spouse, typically it is the female, just saying, historically speaking, they'll step in, be the caregiver, and they don't know what the long-term care plan was. You knew in your mind because it was all in your spreadsheets, but you never communicated that to your spouse. So have that conversation with your spouse and make sure that they have that permission to spend down those assets. Now, of course, like I mentioned, better yet, buy long-term care insurance. If it's really stressing you out and it's really bugging you in terms of, hey, are my assumptions correct? Buy a policy that at least covers something, right? That at least covers some of those monthly costs, tax-free, and then supplement the rest with your assets, with your income sources. I can promise you, if this is stressing you out and then you buy insurance, that's going to give you a lot of peace of mind. Okay. Because the best plan is one that not only gives you that peace of mind, but also keeps your spouse, keeps your loved ones mentally and physically well during that period of time, should it ever come if you need care. Because remember, it's harder for the caregivers mentally, physically, emotionally, than it is for the ones actually receiving the care. Okay, third and final question. I'm going to read verbatim. Paying for medical care until my wife and I qualify for Medicare. Kind of rhymes there. So paying for medical costs, basically buying insurance before Medicare kicks in. And this is one of the questions I hear more than anything from early retirees is, how do we pay for healthcare before we become Medicare eligible at 65? And I get it. Listen, medical coverage is part of the core pillars, if you will, of needs in retirement. Like, you need basic health care. Your health is everything. If you don't have your health, you have nothing. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If you don't have your health, nothing else matters. And, so I get that. It's expensive. It's scary to manage being uninsured. So of course you're not going to go that route. But I think moreover, more than anything else, you've been paying into Medicare for 3 decades plus potentially. So you're sort of preparing mentally to work until you can reap the benefits of Medicare, which is age 65. But here's the thing. For most people, it is very manageable, okay, to bridge the gap. If you retire even 55 for 10 years, bridge the gap until you become Medicare eligible, or maybe you retired 60, so you have a 5-year bridge without any Medicare, but you can do something else. You can get your insurance somewhere else. And oftentimes, it does not have to stop you from retiring actually when you want. You don't have to just work until 65 just because that's when you qualify for Medicare. So I would say this one is more than anything else shifting your perspective and not allowing that fear of the unknown get in the way of actually you doing what you want to do from a retirement perspective. We literally just had this conversation with a client. Initially, the plan was to retire at 62. That would be at the beginning of 2026. We had a review with them the last few weeks. It's a little stressed out about insurance and bridging the gap until 65, when he was going to be eligible for Medicare. And he actually said at the beginning of the meeting, he was like, you know what? I've decided to work a few more years so I can become Medicare eligible. The cost of care is just scary to me. This is, again, what we're talking about here. This is the same dynamic that every early retiree goes through. So I think one of the things I would tell you is you're not alone in this concern. Like, everyone else has the same mindset. If you're going to retire before 65, you need to find some kind of healthcare bridge solution. But we ran the numbers for this individual, for this couple, and added a pretty sizable buffer, okay? It's substantial cost on top of our baseline healthcare assumption for that medical coverage, for that 3-year bridge. And literally, it barely moved the needle in his overall financial plan. I mean, sure, if he worked 3 more years and saved more, he definitely had a little bit more of a cushion. He certainly had a little bit more of a cushion to leave as a legacy or for unexpected events, but he had plenty cushion retiring at 62. He had plenty cushion to leave as a legacy, plenty of cushion for those unexpected events like long-term care. And so he absolutely did not need to work until 65. So I think the lesson here is, like, instead of obsessing over every dollar of medical costs and keep potentially that trapping you or being a golden handcuff into your career that you may not want to stay in for very much longer, plan for it, yes, but don't let it prevent you from retiring on your timeline. Because there are several other ways to get coverage before 65. So a couple of things that we talked about with this client is, hey, what about COBRA? If you really love your plan, love your health insurance, you can COBRA anywhere from 18 to 36 months, depending on your situation. It can be pricey, certainly can be pricey. So, not saying this is going to be the most cost-effective way to do it, but at least it allows you to keep that same policy for a certain period of time to maybe get you closer to that age 65 target. I think the most popular one I see, though, for early retirees is on the exchange, on the Affordable Care Act marketplace plans. Okay. These are oftentimes more affordable with COBRA, but you can also potentially qualify for tax credits, essentially premium tax subsidies, depending on what your modified adjusted gross income is. I did an entire YouTube video on this topic. I actually did it twice. I did one at the end of last year, one at the beginning of the summer, and then one about a month and a half, 2 months ago, because the rules are changing on this one. Long story short, in 2021, during COVID, they kind of expanded these premium tax credits, like who could qualify based on modified adjusted gross income. So before, it was a hard cutoff cliff. So once you exceeded 400% of the federal poverty line, which you may think like, well, Kevin, I'm way over the poverty line, even by 400+%. We're talking about modified adjusted gross income as a retiree. So we're talking wages are gone. Earned income is gone. IRA distributions, maybe you can defer those until 73 or 75. And maybe you've got a nice war chest in your taxable bucket that you can tap into. I'm telling you right now, we've seen clients take out several hundred thousands of dollars and still qualify for premium tax credits. But there was a gradual slope in 2021 where it said, you know what, instead of cutting it off at 400%, we're going to kind of make a gradual slope instead of a cliff. Well, at the end of 2025, that is set to revert back to the cliff. We'll see right now. Actually, part of the government shutdown, I think, based on what I've been reading, is that they are talking about trying to extend this one more year. But check out those 2 YouTube videos, because I talked a little about how they calculate modified adjusted gross income, strategies to keep your modified adjusted gross income down. Literally just go to the YouTube channel and just type in ACA premium tax credits. But also what I'll do is I'll add a link to that particular video for your convenience in the show notes. So definitely do not sleep on the ACA. Do not sleep on healthcare.gov. That is a very, very viable option, especially if you can keep that modified adjusted gross income down. It doesn't matter how much in assets you have. You could be worth $20 million and qualify for ACA premium tax credits. At least right now, we're recording this in 2025. Okay. Another option, if you're maybe not eligible for the premium tax credits, or maybe you're not loving the restrictiveness or the options within the ACA, maybe COBRA is not an option forever, you could just buy a policy directly through a health insurance broker, directly through an insurance company, and you could really tailor the coverage that you want with your specific needs. And then, of course, you can lean on spouse. If your spouse is still working, you can qualify for health insurance on their benefits. Great. That's a great bridge until healthcare. But if none of those work for you, but you're done with your current job, maybe you can even find a different gig that offers healthcare and do that for a period of time until you get 65. But I think what I would say is, yes, medical coverage is very important. Don't ignore it. But early retirees, in my opinion, stress so much about healthcare, and it becomes this psychological barrier where they find themselves trapped in a career that they may not want to stay in for very much longer, or they were ready to retire yesterday. and financially they have the capacity to do so. Okay, so plan smart, account for the cost, and move forward with whatever decision you decide to do. Move forward with confidence, because your freedom doesn't have to wait for you to turn 65 and become Medicare eligible. That's it for today, everybody. I hope you all found this episode helpful. If you did, make sure to leave us a review. We'd love that. We appreciate that. Any 5-star reviews on Spotify or Apple really helps share our content with more people, and really looking to make an impact and help more people. That's what we're all about. And listen, if you have questions that you want me to address or discuss on future episodes, future Q&A sessions, drop them right in the comment section. Put them in the Spotify, put them in the YouTube comment section. If you don't want to do that, you can just email me directly at kevin@imaginefinancialsecurity.com. And listen, if you're over 50, you've accumulated somewhere between $1 million, $5 million for retirement, you want to fire your boss and you want to enjoy retirement and worry less about money, we would love to help you in that journey. Make sure to visit our website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or you can simply fill out the retirement readiness questionnaire in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you, get to know you, see how we can help you with your journey to and through retirement. Thank you all for tuning in. This is Kevin Lau signing off.